And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
Yo, Lord Willin, Jeff Canarsie, Mob Talk Radio. Check it out. Yo, we stay quiet like Russell Buffalino when things will get ugly like Pepsi's death in Casino. Who do we know? No one, nobody. But we're all well respected like Della Croce and Gotti. I know wild nights, Havana nocturne. Light up a cigar and watch your spot burn. You'll get patty whacked, I'm tough like Irish dock workers. Run with guys, hooligans and block lurkers. Corner berserkers, street savvy soldiers. You better pay. Don't make me say I told you. Code you don't betray, I say what I mean. Providence and Brooklyn all the way to the Bean. I'd rather be unseen, like Vinny the Chin. I don't gotta go to Vegas to see cities of sin. Pull the pin, drop bombs like Danny Green. I write homicide like the murder machine. Lansky Luciano, mastermind the racket. Up in the clam house with a milli in my jacket. Move around when the streets get darker. Pay homage to real bosses like Gambino and Patriarcha. Mob talking, but you don't talk to the mob. Lord Will and Jeff Canarsie, we stay on our job. This is Mob Talk, straight from the streets. Mob Talk, the life over beats. Lord Will and Jeff Canarsie, bringing you the real. Kill all rats, you already know the deal. This is Mob Talk, straight from the streets. Mob Talk, the life over beats. Lord Will and Jeff Canarsie, bringing you the real. Kill all rats, you already know the deal.
And welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I'm your host, Jeff Canarsie. We've got the big one this week, Whitey Bulger. I know that I said last week that I was going to come back like on Tuesday and get it done, but I was a little hungover, not in the drinking sense or whatever, just hungover from like a weekend of just like running around. I had a Christmas party to go to. There was a lot of stuff that went on. So I was exhausted. So that's the way it is. So today what we got is the Whitey Bulger show. It's a massive show. Some of the things that I will say you probably have heard. There are some other things that I think probably you haven't heard. I have a little more, my information is not any more in-depth than anything else that you haven't heard before, but I happen to know some things that a lot of people don't. Excuse me. So today I'm going to cover one topic of news, which is very brief. We're going to get to some emails, which were fucking downright, like, X-rated as they get. Like, these people are getting real creative with the things that they say. And then we're going to get to the show. I didn't take any questions this week, basically because this show is going to be very long. Probably, I'm shooting for like, an hour and 25 minutes. That's, if I could get it done in that amount of time, that would be fantastic. So, let me get to a couple things first. The first news note is Ndrangheta is now sort of moving itself into London. And the reason why this is happening is because London does not have laws that are against being a member of organized crime. And so what's happening is Ndrangheta members are going to London now, opening up shop, using traditional rackets. And really, if they get caught, they're going to face like charges and stuff like that. But they're not going to get that organized crime charge, which is sort of good for them in a sense. Last couple days, we've seen 90 more arrested here and there. The only way you're ever going to stop organized crime is if you take away the money. You can put them in jail, but for every guy they take off the streets, another one's going to come up. Italy has done this for a long time. They follow the money, and once they're able to follow the money, they seize the bank accounts. That's a game changer. You're never going to be able to stop them from making money, but if you can sure as shit take the fucking money from them, that changes the game. And that's what Italy has done. That's what Canada is going to start attempting to do. The Netherlands, Germany, Scotland, all these other countries are going to start doing that, but you're never going to eradicate the mob. Anybody that tells you that mafia is over, and listen, in life, everything adjusts, everything evolves, and you're never going to take away organized crime. It's always going to be there. But how you cripple organized crime is you take the money, because that's the bottom line. If you take their money, what the fuck are they going to do? They're going to fucking go buy Tic Tacs or the credit card or something. So the reality is that you're never going to stop it. But what's happening over in Europe especially is law enforcement is really going after Cosa Nostra and Ndrangheta and all the other groups. And the only way they're having any success is by taking the children, which we talked about last week, and they're taking the money, the real estate holdings, and all of that. That's the only way they're going to do it. And so I think you're going to continue to see sort of that path. But I think that A lot of law enforcement, especially in the United Kingdom, are very surprised that the mob is moving in different circles now over there. And honestly, the United Kingdom's going to have to change their laws. They're going to have to use a RICO type of law to get rid of them if that's what they want to do. But the problem is they're like mites. Once they infest, they just spread. And that's sort of how it works. Okay. So that's pretty much what's going on there. Like I said, there was 90 or 150 more arrested. That makes it like 300 in the last month and a half. So they're trying to do something, but how long that lasts, who knows? All right. Let's see. On the Flanagan's front, because I'm getting a lot of emails, and the reason why I don't answer specific questions related to the Flanagans is, A, because this is in what you would call pre-production mode. There's a couple of things that are going on that we have to get done before we can get to the gravy train, so to speak. And so I don't say a lot about it because things change. If you know anything about the television business, you know anything about the movie business, what starts off as a script gets changed, gets morphed into something different. It takes on sort of a new likeness. It takes on a different depth, a different level. Characters that you might have had that were in the beginning are now changed. They're different. There's new people. So it's ever evolving. It's never going to be exactly like I could tell you today. It may change tomorrow. So that's why I don't talk about it a lot, but what I can tell you is one thing that will happen. You will see a trailer before you see anything else, which as far as I know, we're really aiming to shoot a trailer like right after Christmas time in January, maybe the middle, maybe the end. And then there'll be episodes released, et cetera, et cetera. So for those people that are continuously, and listen, I'm not an asshole, and by any stretch of the imagination, I'm not trying to be a dick to fucking nobody here, but when you message me, and this isn't about anybody individually, so if you think I'm talking about you, I'm not, because there's a collective. If you're messaging me and you're asking me to be in the show, first of all, you have to understand a couple of things. I don't control any of that. That is not in my hands. Do I have a say? Sure, of course. But realistically, if I'm not the one dumping, $500,000, $300,000, whatever it is, into the project itself, I have very limited say as far as who gets casted. Because at the end of the day, you've got to be able to act. This isn't like when The Sopranos fucking casted and every jerk off in South Jersey and North Jersey showed up because they thought they looked a certain thing that made them a valuable asset as an actor. The reality is that you can typecast people all day long, and you can bring them in, let them play a role here, let them play a role here. But the reality is you got to act. You got to be able to act. This is not a bullshit project. This isn't like one of your jerk-off films where it's Frank Vincent and Vinny Pastore and like fucking 15 other people nobody's ever seen, and it's an awful movie, goes right to DVD. That is not what this is. This is a legitimate TV show. This is a legitimate project. And while I can certainly appreciate there's a huge buzz, you have to understand I don't control that. I don't care who promises you what. If it's coming from other people, I'm going to be honest with you, don't believe it. Because sure, we're all going to say, sure, we'll see what you can do. We'll put you in. We'll try to find a spot. But the reality is that we can't do that for everybody. Just because you look a certain way doesn't mean you can act. Just because you maybe don't look like you should be in it doesn't mean you can't act either. So this is one of those things where while I so appreciate the buzz that's being created by Ciro DiPaggio and everybody else, the fact is that nobody is going to be promised anything. We can talk all day about, maybe we could use you here and there. But the reality is that we don't even know where we're going to be a month from now. So, positive buzz is positive buzz. But I see a lot of people that are like saying they're going to be in a project when I'm telling you flat out you're not. That's the reality. There's a lot of people saying this. And listen, it's one thing if Ciro says it and him and I talk about it and it's like, yeah, this guy would be good for this, that, and the third. That's one thing. But I see a lot of people that just seem to think because the guy smirks at them or somebody like responds to them, they think they're in something. I'm telling you, you're not. And that's the reality. It's not me being a dick, but everybody thinks that because they knew me at some point, I owe them something. You should see the amount of phone calls that I get from people I haven't talked to in 20 fucking years. Hey, Jeff, I really want to be in this thing. And, you couldn't act your way out of a fucking tuna can. So the reality is that while I would love to use everybody, the plain fact is we can't. And as we get closer to like doing real fucking filming, and not like a trailer, then that's a different ballgame. But until then, I don't know what is being said to people, and maybe somebody can message me and tell me, but the reality is if you're being promised something, it's probably not that accurate. And I'm not saying that Zero's saying that. I'm just saying I just see a lot of chatter out there. But at the same time, I do have friends of mine that can act, people that I do know, that I do want to be in it. And I will do everything I can to make sure they slide in somewhere. Are you going to be like the Tony Sirico of the show? Absolutely fucking not. But you could be a guy standing on a corner that looks a fucking role. Looks the part. So that's what's important. Okay. As far as the web page, I'm getting a lot of comments and a lot of questions about that. I am waiting till my partner Scott comes over from London. He's coming over in January. Him and I are going to sit down and design it together. I have a shell format that's already ready. But because he is involved in some aspects of that, it's just natural to sit down with somebody else and say, you like this, you like that, and then we'll go. So if that means I have to back this shit off till like the first week in February, that's exactly what I'll do. But for the most part, it's going to be very, very basic with a lot of bells and whistles, with a paywall and all that kind of nonsense. So that's where we will be. As far as YouTube goes, I think I explained that last week pretty well, and we're just going to stick YouTube with the fucking thumbtack in the ass. I mean, as far as I'm concerned. Okay. All that being said, I wanted to get to these emails. And then once we get to the emails, finish those, I only picked, I think, 5 or 6. And let me tell you this right off the bat. These emails are pretty nasty. This is just the tip of the iceberg of the stuff I get. I could sit here I could do a 2-hour show with the hate mail. Somebody said to me, oh, you should say their names. I don't, because that's what they want. They want to get some sort of fucking validity out of me bashing them. It's a very sick world we fucking live in. It's almost like S&M type of shit. Like, they want to say these filthy things, and then I say their name, and then all of a sudden they're like shooting in their pants over it. I don't understand it. It's stupid. And realistically, it's the same fucking, like, when you look at my stats on YouTube, there's always like 10 fucking dislikes, and I don't give a shit who likes my stuff and who doesn't, because it's overwhelmingly fucking successful. A lot of people like it, but I know who the same 10 jerk-offs are that are disliking it. I know every single one of them, because it's the same ones that do this shit everywhere else. And that's the reality. So if you have, first of all, children should not be listening to my show. Oh, I'm going to sneeze, I think. Holy fuck. Excuse me. Children shouldn't be listening to my show in any stretch of the imagination to begin with. So if you have like a 13-year-old kid, don't play my show in front of them. It's not good for them. They, the language and all of that bullshit. But these emails are kind of rough. And I may respond to like 1 or 2 of these on the air in the way that I do. Which is probably going to get me in a little bit of shit, but that's okay. So we're going to do the emails. Like I said, next week, look for probably Monday. There's going to be Q&A next week. Put all your comments here. You can either message me privately over on Facebook, fucking go to the post and drop your questions, or hit me up on Twitter at RealMobTalk7. All right, so we're going to do the emails, and then we're going to take a break and come back to the Whitey Bulger show. All right, first one, and I'm not going to say who this is from, but they always have goofy names too, like El Douchebag 7. It's like these people are not creative when it comes to names. Like Harry Taco 4. Like, really? Come on. I wish they would use their real names for like once. It's like these assholes go and set up all these fake accounts to do this shit. All right. I was wondering if your information comes with a Mafia decoder ring. I love how you Photoshop photos of yourself with people and claim you know them. Like, really? Like, this is the shit that I deal with. Now, this isn't a bad one. This is kind of comical to me because I must really be good at Photoshopping because, like, so you mean that I Photoshop myself in photos with other people, and these other people who I really don't know are friends with me on Facebook, and they post the same exact photos, so we're all in some sort of Ponzi scheme together of fucking putting out fake photos? Listen, it's not who you know in this world, it's what you know. So, Mafia decoder ring, nope, don't have one of those, but if I did, you could probably pull it out of your mother's ass, because that's where it would be. Okay. Next one. All you do is rant. I bet you wouldn't say half this shit to rats' faces. Gutless fuck. all right, so let's analyze the first part. All you do is rant. Sure, I rant a little bit, but that's not all I do. I bet you wouldn't say half this shit to rats' faces. Rats' faces is a very interesting comment, because obviously the way you say that, you don't like rats, so what the fuck do you care what I would say to them? And I have said that to them. I will say that to them. I think anybody that knows me, anybody that's followed me for like the 3.5 years, whatever the fuck it's been, knows I'm going to say whatever the fuck I want. I'm going to say it to them. I'm going to say it to them. I always have. I always will. I direct people right to the fucking source of the information. And I can't help it if they don't want to come out and play. Rats do the same thing. They hide and they sit like fucking trolls and they do their things. And the funniest thing about that is they can be rats and whatever. But then they have a whole legion of little rat nipple suckers that fucking suck off the teat of them like they're fucking somebody. They're nothing. They never were anything. So, you're entitled to your opinion, but believe me, I would say that to them. Anybody that knows me will tell you that I would. I'm not afraid of anybody. All right, where you keep hiding, Canarsie? I keep looking for you. You never come outside in Brooklyn. Punk, you wouldn't last 1 minute in Brooklyn. Well, the truth is, jerk off, I lived in Brooklyn for 2.5 years. I don't live there anymore, and if you had any fucking intelligence, you would know that. I pretty much regularly post where I am, where I'm at. So if you want to be a man, you want to be a fucking hero, do me a favor, do yourself a favor, and take the dick out of your mouth for 3 seconds and come see me if that's what you want. I get a little tired of that kind of shit because it's like Brighton Beach, fucking Canarsie, fucking Bed-Stuy. I'm all over Brooklyn. I post where I'm at constantly so you jerk-offs will feel like a tough guy and come out and play. And you never do. You talk all the shit. I went looking for you. You didn't come looking for me. You didn't come looking for me. Nobody ever does. Same jerk-offs in Philadelphia do the same shit. Oh, if you were here, you do what? Here I am. Come see me. And they don't. They just run their fucking mouths like a bunch of jerk-offs, like a bunch of 14-year-old little boys. And that's the reality. Okay, you don't seem to talk about Albanians. Why is that? They are real gangsters. Stop defending the Italians. They aren't shit anymore. Okay, first part. You don't seem to talk about Albanians. Why is that? Okay, you ready for this? Tell me 2 things Albanians have added to American history. I'll wait. Need more? Give me a list of things that Albanians have done for the world. I'll wait. Exactly. Albanians are the real gangsters, are they? Okay. Well, in part, Albanians are tough people. I don't like Albanian people. I never have. I never will. But they are a tough people. But the reality is that I think that, and I've always said this about Albanians, and I always will. If they were organized, forget about it. They're crazy enough to do their own thing. But it's been my experience that you deal with a lot of knuckleheads. And to compare them to Italians, listen, all Albanians own Italian restaurants. That should tell you something. Albanians stole John Gotti's fucking coffee table. That should tell you something. An Albanian hero. Tell me one. I'll wait. So that's my thing. Do I hate Albanians? No, I'm not fond of them. I'm just not fond of them. And that's just my particular opinion. Not that they're a weak people, not that they're a soft people. I think they're an overhyped people. That's just me. These guys with their fucking man buns and their fucking Audis. That's it. I can't, because I've dealt with a lot of different Albanian people. And maybe my Albanian hatred, if I had any, goes back to one jerk-off who's really not even Albanian. He's a fucking wannabe Albanian. That's what that is all about. But Albanians are good people. It's just that I think people get a distorted sense of reality because the real, true, good Albanian people aren't doing the shit that this other jerk-off does. So that's reality. All right. While I enjoy your show, I have visions of you getting it from behind with a red and black Albanian dildo. Here we go again with the Albanian shit. Ball gag and all. Maybe you can talk about what it's like really getting fucked then. See, I really didn't want to read this one, but I think it's funny that a lot of pro-Albanian people don't like me. Imagine that. And so let's break that down for a fucking second. The reason why people are saying this is because they worship an Albanian scumbag. who really just kind of figured out he was Albanian, because if you go back in history, this is the same jerk-off who was saying he was Italian for fucking 20 fucking years. So people become Albanian when it's convenient to become Albanian. You're either Albanian or you're not. You're either Italian or you're not. You're either Irish or you're not. So all this little pretend shit of, well, I'm Albanian now because you either were or you weren't. And so these people that like come at me and say this ridiculous shit about Albanians don't know anything fucking to begin with about the Balkans or Albania. And the only fucking thing that they do know is what one particular fake Albanian says. And that's the truth, because if you're truly Albanian, then you have Albanian pride, not when it becomes convenient for you to be Albanian. That's just, I can't say it any more than that. All right, when you launch your website and it fails, when you launch your website and it fails, are you going to run back to Gotti for money? You're going to end up like that guy Cosmonaut sitting in a basement jerking off to tiger porn. I'm assuming that you're talking about Chris Casparosa. I mean, I could be wrong, Cosmonaut. I mean, maybe that makes sense. First of all, my website won't fail. There are things in place where I know how to make money. I know how to hustle. I know how to do my thing. It's not going to fail. Run back to Gotti for money. Listen, let me make this very clear, because this is why I know where this certain particular message is coming from, because these types that support rats always throw John Gotti Jr. or a Gotti name in the mix, because these guys can't breathe without saying Gotti. It's ridiculous. They are psychopaths. They are fucking jerk-offs. And they have some sort of, I think that it's a sexual thing that they have with the name Gotti. I really think that they need to mention that name it gives their smear campaign, and it gives their bullshit comments like some sort of validity. First of all, I've never gotten any money from anybody. I'm self-made. Anything that I make on my own. I know where the go get money from Gotti comes from, because this is what these people say, because they can't understand why anybody would defend anybody. Oh no, it's always about payments. Really, I can tell you for a fact, I don't get paid. I don't think I've met anybody that has ever gotten a dime for defending anybody. And that's one of the bigger lies that these people tell, that Chris Casparosa sits at home and he gets paid from the Gottis. It's not true. None of that is true. That's absolutely 100% false. Not true. I may not always get along with the guy, but I'm telling you the truth when I say the guy doesn't get a dime. The guy does what he does on his own. So you don't have to like him, and that's perfectly acceptable to me. But don't lie and say he's getting money to do what he does, because that's not the case. You got to understand, Chris likes that shit. He likes to do, listen, no disrespect to Chris, but he likes to do weaselly shit. He likes to out you. That's his thing. He gets something on you, and he's going to stick on you like a fucking tick till he buries you. And people don't like that. I don't really even like that, but that's his method. There's a method to everybody's fucking madness, and that particularly happens to be his, but he's not getting paid for it. Because if he was, I'd be really pissed. Because if you're burying people left and right and getting a paycheck on top of it, holy fuck, how can anybody be mad at this guy? It's a score for him. And as far as sitting in a basement jerking off to tiger porn, why would I jerk off to tiger porn? Of all things, like why not moose porn? Moose and farmer porn. They need a website for that. Oh, for Christ's sakes. All right, I think I got one more. I'm a long-time listener, and I enjoy your show. I was wondering how you deal with all the hate messages and etc. It would drive me absolutely crazy. These people are all losers, and I think the depths they sink to trying to get you to respond is pretty lame. Even worse, they're all unemployed 55-year-old men on welfare. I could not have said that any better than myself. That was a perfect... I don't even think I should respond to that, because I think that that's like the general sentiment I was trying to get across, was that these are 50-something-year-old men who were never anything in the streets, never ever anything as adults. They were junkies, pimps, whores, you name it, that's what they were. They're nothing. When they leave this world and they write a list of the things that they contributed to, what did they contribute to? Defending a rat. Yeah, because that's like a high watermark right there. What did I do? I defended rats my whole life. That's the reality. They're 55-year-old men, 56, 57-year-old men who have contributed nothing to society. They're jerk-offs, scumbags, liars, pricks, And the list just goes on and on and on. And they don't even make valid arguments. If you're going to have an argument with anybody, always have a valid point. But it's like they're like the immature 14-year-old boy in their first relationship where they can't argue what the real problem is, like their jealousy, their jealousies, their envies. No, it's got to be, oh, well, you're not paying attention to me. That's how these guys argue. They don't make any sense. They don't make any logical points. Instead, it's name-calling, it's bullying, and it's all this other shit. And it's like, these guys got the shit beat out of them on the fucking playground. They took the trumpet up the ass. I can tell you that much. All these guys did, because they're nothing. Because let me tell you the secret, and this is the God's honest truth for a lot of people that listen to my show. Here's the secret, because there's a lot of these guys on fucking the Facebook Mafia. That's what we call it. Anybody that sends you a message acting like a tough guy ain't a gangster. Gangsters don't behave in that manner. Do you want to know what gangsters really do? They don't talk about it. They are about it. And they come to your door and they knock. And you open the door and they kick your fucking teeth in. That's how that happens. So for all you people that, and I see it because there are certain types on Facebook where they friend request me and I look at the mutual friends and they may have one or two people, but then I look at like all the fakes, the wannabes and the rats that they're friends with. I don't get it. And then these are the same people that talk, oh yeah, I'm following the code. Motherfucker, you got 9 of the biggest rats I've ever seen in my life on your fucking friends book page or your Facebook page. And somehow that makes you tough. Makes you a jerk off in every single category that there is. Stop it already. Just be yourself. Just because you know somebody don't make you a tough guy. You know how many people I know, the first thing that comes out of their fucking mouth when they say something stupid about you and you confront them, oh, you don't know who I know. The minute that you go to that fucking line, you don't know who I know, means you're a bitch and you're a coward. Because now, instead of being a fucking man and saying it to me or to anybody else, you got to rattle off some fucking ghost name you heard. Because you don't know anybody. Because if you did and you were a tough guy or you were a guy in the fucking streets doing by the code, which you say code like you're a fucking pirate, it's the code, matey. You don't know anything about the fucking code. All you know is what you read and what you hear. And the reality is the first thing you come out with, you don't know who I know. I don't give a fuck who you know. My issue is with you. But if you want to go rattle off a bunch of fucking names you read in a book to try to impress me, go right ahead. Because you're the same one that's going to take it. Same one that's going to take it in a parked car like somebody else I know outside of a fucking casino. And nobody mentions that. Nobody wants to talk about that thing. So listen, I'm not trying to get off in a rant, and I need to take a break and then come back and get to Jimmy Bulger. But I think the reason why I say the things that I do is specifically about this is that it's sort of a hypocritical thing, and it's like it's a giant oxymoron. It's like you telling everybody you're a fucking Hell's Angel and you're riding a fucking Kawasaki, but yet you took the Kawasaki shit off the bike and you put the Harley Davidson logo on it. That's what you're doing. Like, you're entitled to like who you want. You're entitled to believe who you want. You're entitled to, like, worship who you want. I personally don't give a fuck. But what you shouldn't do is try to act tough guy with me or anybody else, because it's not just me you do this with. You do it with everybody. You know, what are these pinheaded 55, 56-year-old jerk-offs going to say? I've known him 20 fucking years. No, you really haven't. And look at who you're defending. Everybody's entitled to defend whoever they want. But the reality is you're defending a guy who told on everybody. You think he's not going to tell on you? Where are your fucking morals? Well, I know Jimmy the Woman and Johnny Roast Beef and Jimmy Donuts. Doesn't matter who you fucking know. I've said this 1,000 times. This isn't a tough guy routine. It's the truth. Who you know, it doesn't fucking matter. You're either tough or you're not. There's a couple of them in Philly think they're big tough guys. Huge tough guys. And somebody I know in Philadelphia, in certain circles, literally looked at me and told me the following: Jeff, get a bullhorn and a tent. Go to Broad Street, talk shit about their mothers, their grandmothers, their kids. Who gives a fuck? They're not going to do a thing to you because they're all bullshitters and punks. And he's right. That's what they are. They talk all this shit. They talk about getting in a car and hurting somebody. I think it's very well known where I live. I'm still waiting. You know, so it's like, knock off the nonsense, move on with your life, and fucking value real people. And stop using that phrase, I know somebody. You don't know shit. Only thing you know is you don't even know which end smells the worst. That's your problem. All right, all that being said, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Jimmy Bulger. And per the usual, you know where to send your threats, your complaints, your compliments. And I do get good emails, too. I should read those, too. But I like the filthy ones. And it's always like something with a dildo. I don't get it. It's like they think I got like a dildo collection or something because I don't. That you know of. All right, all that being said, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we are going to talk about VR. Wait, what's VR? Or is it RV? No, it's VR. VR knows what VR is. And we're not going to talk about VR on the show. And everybody's going to say, whoa, what is that code? VR. VR knows who VR is. VR is fantastic and special. And I adore VR. Stay tuned. In my travels, I'm always looking for a clothing brand that I feel like represents me. Anybody can go to a store and buy a t-shirt with a gimmick, but if you believe in 3 core values like I do, loyalty, honor, and respect, then look no further than Omerta Brand Clothing. You can catch them at omertamia.com, OMERTAMIA.com, with locations in Europe, California, Boston, Brooklyn, Florida, Pennsylvania, and Washington. They have a great clothing line with hats, shirts, sweatshirts, keychains, anything you might need, stickers. You want the rats to stop snitching? Go right out and get yourself a sticker. But if you want to live your life by the gentleman's code, look no further than Omerta Brand Clothing. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are talking the life and times of James Whitey Bulger. Now, you're going to hear some things that may be surprising, but I want to make this point very clear. I don't feel bad for what happened to him. I don't feel bad for the way his life ended. And as recently as, and I'll talk about it a little bit in the show, as recently as just the other day, I think his family filed some kind of ludicrous multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the feds and the Bureau of Prisons, excuse me, for the demise and how that happened. And I think they have a valid argument to an extent of you're putting Whitey Bulger on a fucking tier with organized crime members. How did you think that was going to fucking end? I don't think it's so much the fact that it happened, it's the way it happened. Why was it allowed to happen? Like, what were the circumstances that allowed some genius to make the idea that putting him on that tier was a good idea? And yes, I think there's going to be conspiracy theories that are going to play out for the next 40 years that the FBI fucking put him there intentionally and all this other shit. But the reality is that you live life a certain way long enough. You live by the sword, die by the sword, live by the gun, die by the gun. And that's the reality of what happened. Excuse me. And so we can argue conspiracy theories from now until fucking 2050. But I just think circumstance and I think there is some validity to arguing why the fuck he was put there to begin with, why he was put on that tier, but it's not my job to kind of decipher that. It is what it is. But all that being said, we're going to take you through a timeline of his life, talk about some things, and, obviously I'll interject where I can. James Joseph Whitey Bulger was born September 3rd, 1929 in South Boston, Massachusetts. His father, John, was actually from Harbor Grace, Newfoundland. His mother was a first-generation Irish-American from Boston named Jane. Whitey's father was known as a tough union laborer and longshoreman, but there was an industrial accident in which he lost his arm, and the family would end up suffering tremendously financially. Not that they were rich by any stretch of the imagination prior to that, but they at least had a steady income and could afford to live. But after that, the family is really tossed into abject, deep poverty after his father lost his arm. In May of 1938, the Mary Ellen McCormick Housing Project, which today is known as the Old Harbor Village Public Housing Project, was opened in Southie. The Bulgers moved in, and the Bulger children would grow up there in a rough-and-tumble neighborhood. William, Michael, and John, by most accounts, were good kids, well-behaved kids. Perhaps maybe one of them, as he got to be an adult, sort of got into some shit. But they excelled in school, whereas Whitey was sort of the complete opposite. He was pretty much drawn to the streets. from a very, very early age. As a kid, Whitey couldn't seem to stay out of trouble. He would steal, he would rob, he would fight anybody over anything. He was loyal to South Boston his entire life, and anybody who dared cross his path was met with swift justice, even as a kid. Somebody that I talked to told me, look, even as a kid, Whitey would beat the fuck out of somebody with a bat, a stick, a bike chain, whatever he could get his hands off if they mouthed off to him. He wasn't against going hand to hand. He just preferred to send a message quick. And this was even at 14 years old. So obviously we see that Whitey Bulger, even as a young kid, just had a penchant for violence, had a penchant for doing things his way. Maybe it was the abject poverty. I'm not going to try to get into the sociological sort of things when it comes to that, because I think that situation, how you're raised, how you're treated, sort of has an impact. I've always said people are not born monsters. They just sort of become monsters based on their surroundings and etc. I don't know that much about Whitey's childhood with his father and his mother to give that any indifference, but I think that it's safe to say that when you go from a normal surrounding to abject poverty, it becomes sort of the way you end up. His penchant for crime would lead him, like many other kids with the same sort of thinking, to join street gangs. And what he does is he joins a street gang named the Shamrocks. He would get arrested for assault, battery, armed robbery, then attempted rape. A lot of people don't know that. And he would end up being sentenced to juvenile reformatories. He would be released in, I believe it was April of 48, and he would join the United States Air Force, where his sort of character of who he was and who he would become to sort of would root its ugly head. After basic training, he would be transferred to Smoky Hill Air Force Base in Salina, Kansas, then into Idaho. Bulger was the type of guy who didn't like taking directions, didn't like being told what to do, and his reaction to that would be to punch out commanding officers, which would send him to the stockade on more than one occasion. If you don't know what the stockade is, it's military prison. In 1950, he ends up going AWOL, and he would be arrested a couple of days later. The military had pretty much had enough of him by that point, and they gave him an honorable discharge in 1952, and he would end up returning to Southie. Now, one of the things that was going on in those days in the military is that if you were a behavioral type of fucking problem, there was an out that you could get. George Carlin, the comedian, talked about when he was in the Air Force and how he got out. And one of the things was when you were a disciplinary problem, the last thing the military wanted to do is give you a dishonorable discharge. The minute you get that sort of ruins you for life, because that is that's a fucking mark you just don't want to have. It says a lot about your character in a negative way. And one of the things that George Carlin talked about was there was a way to get out of the military. And this is the same time period. And the way it kind of worked is that if you were a disciplinary problem, what they did was they had a certain article, and I maybe Article 32, I'm not sure what the number was, but it was basically saying that you being in the military, the way that you could get out was, one, you had obviously a military, a sort of an indifference to authority, but that prior to going in, you weren't able to establish, you had already established a career, and by being in the military, it was hurting your career, and that was sort of a quick loophole to get out of the military. The only other way was to say you were fucking obats, crazy, nuts, and a lot of people used that as well. So what Whitey really did was he used that loophole to sort of get out, and they didn't want him there, so it worked for everybody, and he gets an honorable discharge, but by all accounts, his military record was absolutely atrocious. In 1956, he would be sentenced to federal prison for armed robbery and hijacking, and he would end up getting sent to Atlanta USP. Allegedly, and this is according to mob rat Kevin Weeks, while Whitey was in Atlanta, Whitey would get involved in MK Ultra. If you don't know what that is, I'm going to briefly sort of go into that. MK Ultra was also known as the CIA mind control program, codenamed MK Ultra, and it essentially was a program of experiments on human subjects, first African Americans on the streets, then those in prisons. And what the CIA was trying to do at the time was to find what chemicals or drugs could be used to perfect interrogation techniques. The Manchurian Candidate, so to speak, if you're following that logic. The CIA wanted to further use LSD to force confessions, or to use different chemicals to mind control. And the Manchurian Candidate is you put somebody in hypnosis, you give them drugs, you tell them to kill the president, and that's what they do. And that's effectively what the CIA was attempting to try to figure out how to do. The project was organized to the Office of Scientific Intelligence of the CIA, and it was also coordinated with the U.S. Army of Biological Warfare Laboratories. Fort Detrick in Maryland is well known to be the hub of the Army Biological Warfare Laboratories. They inject monkeys with crazy pills and drugs and watch them go crazy, and that's long been what Fort Detrick was used for. It still is to this day. That's where they use sarin gas on animals to try to, and it's fucked up and it's wrong, but the government tests these things obviously on animals before they, shove it in human beings. So subjects were subjected to LSD, sensory deprivation, other chemicals, hypnosis, in some 80 different institutions, which included hospitals, insane asylums, prisons, etc. Subjects were subjected to verbal abuse, sexual abuse, and even grossly including the sexual abuse of children and other forms of gross torture. That was sort of what they did. The MK Ultra FBI files didn't come out till obviously 30, 40 years after the fact, but some of the things that the CIA did were absolutely fucking vulgar. Just the sexual abuse of children to begin with is just absolutely fucking vile. But welcome to the lesser-known things about the CIA. The CIA also used fronts to operate in the facilities, which included hospitals, prisons, daycares, colleges, universities, and etc. Sidney Gottlieb, who was the CIA chemist, was also the front man in the prison, and he essentially put a bulletin on the prison wall saying that any prisoner that sort of took place in their testing would have prison time shaved off. And he used it under the guise of a pharmaceutical company that was looking for a cure for schizophrenia. Now, how far we want to really believe that Whitey Bulger was willing to subject himself to medication that would prove, or medication that would lessen schizophrenia. First of all, you can't really cure schizophrenia to begin with. They didn't know that in those days. But Whitey Bulger and the other inmates signed up believing it was for the good of others and for themselves. Here's where I sort of disagree with how this has been purveyed. I don't know if it's true if Whitey Bulger went through that. This is coming from Whitey Bulger's mouth to Kevin Weeks. Kevin Weeks doesn't tell the truth. Whitey Bulger certainly didn't tell the truth. But I know for a fact that this particular program was used in Atlanta, USP, and a couple other prisons. The timing is right, so who am I to say it wasn't true? But at the end of the day, I have a hard time believing that Whitey Bulger would sign up for any other reason than to get time shaved off his sentence. So for 18 months, they get tortured, they're given LSD, sleep deprivation, and more, and it apparently had lasting effects on Whitey Bulger. And maybe that was his excuse for how he ended up the way he ended up. He would eventually be transferred from Atlanta to Alcatraz in November of 1959 as prisoner number AZ-1428. He wouldn't be at Alcatraz very long, as he ends up getting transferred in November of 62 to Leavenworth, which was no joke. Then he gets transferred again in 1963 to Lewisburg, which is a medium facility, and he gets released in 65 after serving 9 years in federal prison. After Whitey is released, he vows never to return to prison ever again, no matter what the cost. He ends up finding work as a janitor and a construction worker before ending up going basically right back to the streets, and he becomes a bookmaker and a loan shark with deep ties to Donald Killeen, who at the time was the leader of the Irish mob in South Boston. In 1971, Killeen's younger brother bit off the nose of Michael Dwyer, who was a member of the Killeen rivals, the Mullen Gang. Now, I don't want to get into the whole entire history of the war between the Mullens and the Killeens, but that's a big step for Whitey, because Whitey did what Whitey did, and he's very Machiavellian in how he manipulates both sides during the war. A gangland war obviously erupts between the Mullens and the Killeens, and there are a ton of murders that take place in Boston and in Providence and surrounding suburbs. It was basically a war over control of Southie. The Killeens, as tough as they were outnumbered, outgunned, and outflanked by the Mullens. And it was during the Killeen-Mullen War that Bulger kills his first victim. According to Kevin Weeks, Jimmy wanted Paul McGonigal dead. But it took Jimmy a long time to get around to it. Paulie was one of those guys who talked too much shit. He might have been tough with his hands, but he couldn't shoot a gun if his fucking life depended on it. Finally, Jimmy had had enough. While the war was still going on, Jimmy was driving down 7th Street in Southie when he sees Paulie driving towards him. Jimmy pulls up beside him, window to window, nose to nose, and calls out his name. As Paulie looks over, Jimmy shot him right between the fucking eyes. The problem was it wasn't the right guy. It wasn't Paulie. It was Donald, Paulie's brother, who everybody liked. Donald was one of the most well-liked McGonigal brothers. He wasn't involved in any sort of crime, any sort of nonsense, and so Jimmy freaks out. He drives to Billy O'Sullivan's over on Savin Hill Road. And Billy was sort of his mentor, his rabbi, and his partner, and he tells Billy what happens, and he explains that he whacked the wrong guy, and Billy, who is standing at the stove cooking, turns, looks at Jimmy, and says, "Don't worry about it. He wasn't healthy anyway. He smoked a lot, and he would have ended up with lung cancer. You did him a favor. How do you like your pork chops?" So that should tell you the sort of mentality that not only Jimmy had, but the people he was around had. There was no sort of morality on killing somebody whatsoever. Allegedly, Mullen boss Patrick Nee, Paul McGonigal, was irate that his twin brother, who was not involved in organized crime whatsoever, was killed. He was convinced that Billy O'Sullivan had ordered it. Enraged, he ends up ambushing O'Sullivan and kills him, which infuriated Jimmy Bulger. He wasn't just Whitey's mentor, but he was his partner in the streets, and he was the guy that Jimmy could go to lay off ideas about what to do. Bulger's first act of betrayal in the sense of not being a stand-up guy is realizing that he was on the losing side of the Mullen-Killeen War, and he secretly approaches Howie Winter, who at the time was the leader of the Winter Hill Gang, and he explains that he by himself could end the war in Southie by murdering every single leader in the Killeen Gang. Not long after offering his proposal, Donald Killeen gets whacked outside of his home in Framingham, Massachusetts. According to Patrick Nee, he says the murder was not committed by Bulger, but rather by James Mantville and Tommy King. Also, according to Nee, Bulger and the Killeens fled the city after their boss was killed, fearing that they were on the chopping block. According to Nee, he arranged a sit-down between the Patriarchus Capo, Joe Russo, Howie Winter, and they all got together at Chandler's in the South End. The Mullens were represented by Patrick Nee, and Tommy King and the Killeens were represented by Jimmy Bulger. Following the alleged sit-down, the two gangs joined forces with Howie Winter as boss. Now, I could sort of expand on this a little bit. I can tell you for a fact that, first of all, let me explain something about Whitey Bulger that a lot of people seem to not understand. Whitey Bulger was not fond of Italians. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is that Whitey Bulger didn't know a lot about Italian organized. I mean, he knew about Italian organized crime, but he did not know how the Patriarchus operated, other than his friendship with Ray Patriarcha, which went back 20 fucking years. So this idea that somehow Whitey Bulger was able to give the FBI all this information on the organizational structure of the Italian Mafia is not true. We're going to get to why that's not true. It had more to do with Steve Flemmi, who was actually an inducted member of the Italian mob, who gave the FBI that stuff. Jimmy Bulger, and that's not to say that Jimmy Bulger didn't rat, because he did. That's reality. He ratted. I think, though, by the time we get to the end of this, I think you're really going to understand that even though Whitey Bulger did rat, he's still a rat, always will be a rat. I think that Whitey Bulger also took a lot of the heat for what Steve Flemmi did. And I will sort of explain that. And that's not to any sort of way excuse what he did, because I'm not. I also want to say that the statements from Patrick Nee, I don't believe. Whereas Patrick Nee was a strong force and a tough guy, I'm going to tell you this for a fact. The Patriarchas are not going to sit down with Howie Winter. They're not going to sit down. This is an Irish problem. This isn't an Italian problem. The last thing the Italians want is to get involved in their nonsense, because at the end of the day, both sides, the Winter Hill Gang, the Mullens, and the Killeens were paying street tax to the Patriarchas. The war really was over Southie. Because the North End was all owned by the Italians at the time. Still to this day it is. Southie was just the area that they were warring over. And so this idea that they had to pull a captain in from the Patriarchas to sort of oversee this stuff is a little bit stretching it. They're not going to get involved in that mess. But let's move forward a little bit. All right, so the entire war really was based on profits from loan sharking and bookmaking, and it was really control over Southie. I personally, like I said, I don't believe in these versions of events because I believe it to be sort of a half-truth. And the truth is that the patriarchas got a huge kickback from everything that was going on, and they could have and they would have essentially walked into a meeting like that if this meeting took place, which I believe it did, but I don't believe it was nearly as sort of ominous as Nee likes to tell it. But the patriarchas could walk in and dictate the terms. They didn't have to sit there and parlay anything. What they say went, because the patriarchas, one, had the support of the five families, and the patriarchas on their own did not outnumber the Mullins, the Winter Hill Gang, or the Killeens. They didn't outnumber them. But Raymond Patriarcha was beyond tough. He was beyond respected, and those guys weren't just going to do what they wanted. That's the truth. Whether or not people want to believe that is their thing. The only reason why the patriarchas would have gotten involved is because there was money that was going to be left on the table with all of these people fighting each other, and the murders were going to draw heat. That's the only reason why they would have gotten involved in this. What Ray Patriarcha said, what he said to them, it stuck. These guys didn't do whatever they wanted to, and you people that are in Boston can live in a fantasy land of the Irish telling the Italians what to do, but that's just not the truth. Absolutely 100% not the truth. There was respect between the patriarchas, respect between them and Howie Winter. There was respect between him and Whitey Bulger, and that's the truth. But what nobody really knew then, and probably hasn't investigated or they just don't have the information, was Whitey Bulger was very close to Raymond Patriarcha. They went back a long time, and he was really Patriarcha's eyes and ears in Southie. Because Patriarcha had a lot of rackets in the North End, and he wanted them protected. And Whitey Bulger was sort of the guy that would hear things and sort of let them know what was going on. So this idea that Whitey Bulger absolutely hated Italians is really not true. He wasn't fond of them, but he liked Ray Patriarcha, and he told Ray Patriarcha things, and he was very Machiavellian because it was good for business for Whitey, because he ultimately wanted to take over. And I think the end result is he respected Ray enough where Ray included him in some things. Because if we move forward ahead in time a little bit, there's no way that Whitey Bulger would have been able to move marijuana and guns on ships in the port without Ray Patriarcha's blessing and without a huge kickback. And that's the truth. This idea, because I think history has been distorted, that Whitey Bulger spit in the face of Raymond Patriarcha and was ratting on him, none of that's true. None of that is true. None of that is true. Now, the Angelo brothers, that's a totally different scenario, totally different story, and this is after Raymond Patriarcha has already died anyway. But I can also, like I said, he was Patriarcha's eyes and ears in Southie, and I can state with 100% certainty that Whitey was never in danger, and that Nee's version of events are nothing short of being braggadocious. And I say that because, according to Nee, Whitey Bulger took off because he was scared. Whitey Bulger didn't need to take off. Whitey Bulger didn't take off because he had Patriarcha's blessing, support, and friendship. That gave him carte blanche. So this idea that Nee says, oh yeah, Whitey Bulger took off, he was scared shitless, I don't buy that for a second, and I don't think that's a reality. If you look, especially if you look at Whitey Bulger's history, he wasn't afraid of anybody in the fucking 30s. Why the fuck would he be afraid of somebody, a couple of years, 20 years later? It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But guys are going to have different opinions, and I think Patrick Nee liked to inflate who he was a little bit. So the meeting takes place, the merger is over, the meeting is over, and there's a merger. Bulger ends up confronting Kenneth Killeen with Stevie Flemmi and John Moderano, and he basically tells him the Killeens are done, they're out of business, it was a simple threat, stop or else. And so what basically happens is you take the Mullins, the Killeens, everybody just sort of absorbs into the Winter Hill Gang. Those that didn't were warned to stay out of events or they're going to get killed. That's just the reality. After the 1972 truce, Whitey Bulger and the Mullins were in control of South Boston's criminal underworld. FBI Special Agent Condon noted in his log of September 1973, which I have here printed out, so anybody that doesn't believe this, you can have a copy, that Bulger and Patrick Nee were heavily shaking down all neighborhood bookmakers and loan sharks. So what effectively happens is Bulger and Nee begin to work the fucking streets. They begin to fucking just shake everybody down. It's their fucking turf, their neighborhood, but remember, a large portion of that chunk is going right back to the patriarchal crime family, and so therefore, the more they expand, the more they can make. But like I said, the more they make, the bigger kickback that heads back towards Providence. As the years progressed, Bulger would begin to remove all of his opposition by persuading Howie Winter to sanction the killings of anybody who stepped out of line. In an interview years later with Howie Winter, he would actually say Whitey was a smart guy. He could teach the devil to do tricks. During this era, Bulger's victims included Mullen Gang veterans Spike O'Toole, Paulie McGonigal, and Tommy King. And so as you can see, anybody who becomes a threat to Whitey Bulger, anybody who begins to sort of show power is going to get killed. And it's all in a ploy for Whitey to be the most powerful guy in the Irish mob. According to Kevin Weeks, Whitey didn't fuck with anybody who wasn't a criminal. He didn't bother hardworking people. If someone fucked him, sure, he'd throw him a beating. But what's a beating? Guys recover. He'd be better off killing them, and that's exactly what Jimmy did. Jimmy kills Tommy King in 1975. Tommy and Jimmy were working at Triple O's when sort of this issue happens. They're in the bar, and Tommy, being a Mullins guy, ends up making a fist in Whitey's direction. He's drunk. He makes a fist. Jimmy sort of lets it go for the night, but the next morning, Tommy comes by out of fear because he sort of threatened Jimmy Bulger, and he goes by Jimmy's mother's house where Jimmy was staying to apologize, saying, "Oh, he was drunk. I was drunk. I was out of line. I'm sorry." Jimmy tells him not to worry about it. It's not a big deal. Forget about it. And a week later, Tommy King is dead. He believed he was safe, and he wasn't. And what ends up happening is he ends up getting into a car with Jimmy, John Moderano, and Stevie Flemmi, and Whitey Bulger. They make Tommy sit shotgun. And basically explain to him they were looking to whack somebody had to go, and so that's why he's in the car to begin with. And while driving down the road, John Moderano pulled out a .45 and blew his fucking head off from behind. The entire dashboard and window were covered with blood, skull fragments, and brains. Jimmy pulls over, pulled a hat from underneath the seat, and puts it on Tommy's head and tips the body towards the window, and then just keeps driving down the streets. They even pulled over to a Dunkin' Donuts where John Moderano would go inside and get coffee. Never mind, there's like a dead body sitting in the front seat. They just didn't really care. And then they end up driving down the road, eventually dumping King's body near the Neapontet River in a hole that they dug. Later that same night, Jimmy kills Buddy Leonard and leaves him in Tommy's car off Pildusky Way and Old Colony Projects to confuse the police. Jimmy Bulger was not a guy who was afraid of the cops. Never was, never will. In fact, there was actually a beef between a detective and Tommy King before Tommy King even gets killed. And maybe an effort to appear on the side of law enforcement and a stand-up guy, he actually approaches the detective who had been threatened by Tommy King. Tommy King was a loose fucking cannon, would threaten anybody, and Tommy King had threatened a detective. And the detective was absolutely scared shitless of Tommy King, and he was legitimately terrified. So what Bulger does is he approaches the detective weeks prior, explaining, look, he knew Tommy King, he would control it, and if he has to, he's going to put himself in between the two. He has nothing to worry about. So basically, Bulger's telling a law enforcement detective, don't worry, this guy's not going to touch you. If he does, I'm going to go after him. So what he does is he ends up whacking Tommy King and then goes to the detective and tells him you don't have to worry about King anymore and that Tommy would no longer be a threat to him. Jimmy was smart. He was conniving, and he used that as leverage. He obviously doesn't tell the detective that Tommy King isn't going to be a problem anymore days after it happens. He waits weeks after Tommy King was killed to tell him that. And what it ends up doing is it makes the detective happy, and it's another way that Jimmy could control the police in Boston. And now he has a friend on the force. And he ended up turning murder into a win-win-win situation for himself. In 1970, Howie Winter gets pinched along with others from the inner circle of the Winter Hill Gang. They end up getting charged with fixing horse races. Now, this is the first instance when the mob should have taken notice, because Jimmy Bulger and Stevie Flemmi were left out of the indictments. They cannot be that far deep into it, have a fixed horse race, and not everybody get indicted. That should have been the sign, and it doesn't seem like anybody sort of recognized that at the time. And as a result, Jimmy Bulger and Stevie Flemmi would end up basically stepping right into the power vacuum and never letting it go, and they would move the headquarters from Lancaster Street Garage into Boston, near the Boston Garden in the North End, which at the time was deep Italian territory. In 1971, the FBI was looking for information regarding the Patriarca crime family. The Kennedys had tried and failed for a decade to trap Raymond Patriarca, but had failed on every single fucking level. The FBI at some point would approach Whitey Bulger, and they attempted to recruit him. Special Agent Dennis Condon was assigned to deal with Bulger, but Bulger absolutely refused, saying that he was loyal to his own people and respected Patriarca and wasn't going to talk, and that he needed to basically step off and mind his own fucking business. That's of 71. Now, at the time, Stevie Flemmi was already ratting. Flemmi had been ratting since the 60s, and I don't think Whitey Bulger obviously knew that. But it also further proves what I've said about Whitey all along, that when it came to Ray Patriarca, he never once gave up any information against Ray Patriarca. Never. Not once. It's not to say that he didn't become a rat, because he could have easily ratted very early on, and he didn't. He would go on a couple of years later to go after the Angelos, and Gennaro Angelo specifically, but Ray Patriarca never trusted the Angelos. He never respected them. He never trusted them, and a lot of that's because they bought their way into the mafia. He allowed a payment for them to join, and so when someone doesn't earn street credit or anything, and they buy their way in, they're not trusted. Why Ray did that, I'll never understand, but Ray Patriarca never trusted the Angelos. In fact, the minute that Ray dies in the Angelos, after Ray Patriarca Jr. Sort of is no longer persona non grata, the Angelos destroyed the fucking Providence mob. Destroyed them. Idiots. In 1974, Bulger becomes partners with Stevie Flemmi, who obviously was an Italian mobster and an informant since early of 1965. Like I said earlier, Bulger really didn't have a clue that Flemmi had been a rat since 65. It wasn't until about 5 years later that Bulger agreed with Special Agent piece of shit John Connolly to inform on the Angelos. What likely actually did happen is that Flemmi ended up ratting Bulger out to Connolly, and Bulger really was left with two choices. He either kills Flemmi, who now he knows, is an FBI informant, or he has to kill Connolly. But the problem is, or to kill them both, but you can't. One's an FBI rat, the other's an FBI agent. And so what ends up happening is he just becomes a rat snitch, piece of shit motherfucker. And Bulger really didn't have a choice. He was a deer caught in the headlights. It was either rat or go to prison, because Flemmi had been talking about him too. And yes, it is true that him and John Connolly went back a long way. But Bulger was just put in a spot where he didn't have a choice. And he did have a choice in terms of he could have just gone to prison and shut the fuck up. He could have just blown his own head off and saved the world, did the world a huge fucking favor. But he ends up becoming a piece of shit. 90% of the files. Now, this is what I want people to listen to. 90%. Okay? And I have read thousands, not even thousands. Because 302s, we talk about 302s a lot on the show. Now, a 302 is very detailed, and it's a meeting between an agent and the informant, and the informant is giving information on A, B, C, D, E, events, times, places. 302s are very detailed. They're not one-line sentences. They're not Jimmy Bulger says drugs are coming in through the Patriarca crime family. It's usually more detailed than that, but when you look at Whitey Bulger's 302s, there's something highly suspect. There are duplicates of 302s, meaning that the same exact information was being given over and over and over and over and over again without any real plausible factual evidence to back it up. And that's the one thing that the FBI always wants. They want factual evidence. And if you look at the 302s like I have, Whitey Bulger, he gave up some stuff. And I'm not like dismissing it, but what I'm telling you is he really was giving John Connolly the same bullshit. So 90% of the files related to Whitey Bulger were actually supplanted by Stevie Flemmi, but not by Whitey Bulger. And what I mean by that, and what further proves that, is that Jimmy had only been around Ray Patriarca and didn't have an in-depth internal knowledge like Stevie Flemmi did because Flemmi was an Italian-made guy. The issue is where people argue is that Connolly had to put Bulger's name at the top of the files because he needed the file to stay active. If Bulger is not telling him credible information, the FBI is going to say cut him loose. We're protecting him and he's not giving us shit. And that's exactly where Stevie Flemmi comes in because Flemmi had more information about the Italians than Jimmy ever did. So it was Stevie Flemmi's information that was going into Whitey Bulger's 302s, and Whitey Bulger's name was being put at the top because that's the only way Connolly could keep Bulger as an informant. And Bulger didn't have the information like that. So I'm not saying that Bulger wasn't a rat. What I'm telling you is there is a valid argument for what John Connolly did, and he warped the fucking 302s. That's one of the arguments that if you watch the United States of America versus Whitey Bulger, I think it's still on Netflix, that's one of the things that Whitey Bulger's attorney argues, is that, okay, well, if Whitey Bulger was giving up all this information, why is 90% of it one line and the same thing regurgitated? And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Whitey Bulger doesn't give them information for 5 years. All of a sudden, there's 62 pages that are in-depth shit. Okay, we can make the argument that Whitey Bulger finally started talking, but I'm a firm believer, and I always will be, that was the voice of Steve Flemmi. That Flemmi was giving up all the solid information, but like I said, once again, Whitey Bulger's name had to be at the top. It doesn't mean he didn't talk, doesn't mean he didn't rat, because he is a rat. But it just means that the majority of that information came from Stevie Flemmi. And Kevin Weeks also believes that. So it's not to say that I'm the only one that is buying into some weird theory. Look at the FBI files yourself. And if you can come away with a different conclusion than I did, then by all means. But even Kevin Weeks believed that the majority of that information came from Stevie Flemmi and that Connolly just manipulated the 302s because he had to. Connolly had to have Jimmy as an informant to ensure that he could meet with him and give him tips. Connolly can't meet with Jimmy Bulger unless he's a fucking informant because that creates hypocrisy. It creates a problem. So if he manipulates 302s and throw Whitey Bulger's name on the top of them, then he's got a reason why he could meet with him. If Connolly couldn't explain his actions to the FBI, he gets fired. And so there is some validity to that. Now, how much of that is nonsense versus reality, I'm not sure. I wasn't there. I wasn't involved. But I think Whitey Bulger was giving up shit in the end, big time. Most definitely he was. And Kevin Weeks talks, and we'll talk about that here in a minute, but Kevin Weeks even said he noticed a shift in Whitey Bulger and in the way he behaved, which sort of lends a little bit of credence to the idea that originally Bulger was giving him garbage and nonsense. But in the end, Bulger was nervous, he was erratic. That tells me that's when he started really talking. A rat is a rat is a rat. Don't get me twisted. I'm not defending Whitey Bulger at all. He got what was coming to him. But the idea that Bulger was an informant since 65 and gave up millions of people, I don't buy that. He did give up people, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't as extensive as the FBI wants you to think. The FBI was highly fucking embarrassed at what John Connolly did. Highly embarrassed at the way some of the upper echelon Boston Police Department people were acting. It was a fucking corrupt scandal. And the FBI did everything in the fucking world to try to protect itself because it was fucking embarrassed. Because John Connolly ain't the first. Lynn Del Vecchio's another garbage pail. We've seen this shit repeatedly in a lot of different trials. So I'm not defending Whitey Bulger in any sense of the imagination, but I'm telling you the truth, and I'm using facts and logic. At some point, the information went from, minuscule shit to the Angelos, then to the Greeks, then to the Irish, then to the Polish. And that's what points directly to Whitey Bulger and why he could have never really denied he talked. Because the argument that's made in the United States of America versus Whitey Bulger is that he never talked about anybody. That's not true. He ratted on the Greeks, he ratted on the Irish, he ratted on the Polish, and he went after the Angelos. That he did do. But I think the argument that I'm making is there's no way he could have been an informant in 65. And I think that he was just put into a situation from Flemmi that he had no choice. And I think initially he gave up bullshit. It still makes him a rat cocksucker motherfucker. But I think that the bulk of what he did do and the bulk of the shit he did talk really wasn't until the end. And that's just my perspective. I'm not defending him at all. He's a cocksucker. He got what was coming to him. But that's that. In 1970, Howie Winter, like I said earlier, and most of the leadership were in prison. Bulger and Flemmy end up taking over. And Bulger and Flemmy would end up talking, and suddenly all of Bulger's problems sort of go away. This is something that Kevin Weeks didn't notice. This is something that a lot of others didn't notice. Jimmy Bulger wouldn't be arrested, and most of his enemies end up getting indicted, including the Italians. These are things that Kevin Weeks probably should have recognized, but I think this is 1970s prior to when Kevin Weeks sort of meets him. And Bulger, I think, sort of kind of realizes, hey, this guy Flemmy's great for me. I can do whatever I want, and, I don't get indicted for shit, and I'm getting a paycheck on top of it. And for Whitey, it's a scam. I mean, he's still a rat, but it's a scheming thing. Some have said that Flemmy provided the horse race information to the FBI about Howie Winter's involvement to remove him from power, and he wanted to supplant Bulger. And I happen to believe that, and I believe that because the FBI wanted the Patriarchas badly, and what better way to do it than to get Flemmy to rat out the fixed horse race information, mention the fact that Howie Winter was involved, so he gets removed from power, gets indicted, and now he can put Bulger in charge. It was a way for Flemmy to sort of pad his own bullshit. And Bulger definitely was in on it. And it wouldn't be until 1986 that Bulger and Flemmy helped dismantle the Patriarchas in Boston, which was a move to take over the rackets in the North End, and effectively they end up taking out Gennaro Angiulo and a ton of associates. And it was another power vacuum pretty much ensued by Bulger, and he stepped right in to take over the North End. In 1980, Bulger was approached in Triple O's by Louis Lateef, who was a neighborhood bookmaker. Lateef was a drug trafficker, a mover, and a shaker. The problem was he refused to pay the tax. Not only did he refuse to pay the tax, but he essentially spit in Bulger's face by killing 2 people without Jimmy's permission, and you just didn't do that in South Boston. Lateef went to go see Bulger, and he ends up screaming at him and levying threats that he was going to kill one of his partners, Joe the Barber, over an assertion that Joe the Barber had stolen money from his bookmaking operation. And Bulger explained that Lateef wasn't going to kill anybody. Lateef once again levied the threat that he would. Bulger smirked and laughed and said, "You've stepped over the line, Louie." Louie responded, "Well, if we're friends, you have nothing to worry about, Jimmy." Jimmy laughed and said, "We're no longer friends, Louie." A week later, Louie would be found stuffed into a garbage bag in the trunk of his car, and his car had been dumped on the South End. He had been stabbed, shot, and ice-picked to death. A few weeks later, at Kevin Weeks' wedding, Jimmy ends up joking that Louie was color-coordinated because he was found in a green garbage bag wearing green underwear. Jimmy would joke even further at the empty seat next to him by saying, "Hey, Kevin, say hello to Louie," while laughing his ass off. So Jimmy had no compunction about murder. Neither did Steve Flemmy. Steve Flemmy. In 1982, a Southie coke dealer named Brian Halloran, known on the streets as Balloon Head, approaches the FBI and explains that he witnessed Jimmy Bulger and Stevie Flemmy whack Louis Lateef. John Connolly, who was Bulger and Flemmy's handler at the time, kept them in the loop and told Bulger that what basically Halloran was telling the FBI. Bulger and Flemmy were absolutely enraged, not necessarily about Lateef, but rather the murder of Roger Wheeler, who was a high-lie businessman. He told the FBI that he was present at the Tulsa, Oklahoma hit, and the FBI wasn't buying the shit that Halloran was selling and refused to put him and his family into witness protection, and that was a big mistake because on May 11th, 1982, Bulger, Flemmy, and Kevin Weeks were tipped off by Connolly that Halloran had secretly come back to Southie. Kevin Weeks found out through a source that Halloran was at the Pier 4 restaurant and drove to the scene. Michael Donahue, who was a construction worker, neighbor, and friend of Halloran, incidentally ran into Halloran. Halloran had been drinking, and Donahue, just being a neighborly guy or whatever, didn't want him to drive, and he offers him a ride home. Tragic mistake. As Donahue and Halloran left the lot, Weeks signaled to Bulger over a walkie-talkie that the balloon was in the air. Bulger drives up with a masked man, long believed to be Steve Flemmy, who was armed with a silenced MAC-10. Bulger himself was carrying a .30 caliber carbine. Bulger was wearing a floppy hat and a long-haired wig, pulled the car into position. The other shooter opened fire and sprays the car. Donahue gets killed instantly. However, Halloran lived long enough to tell law enforcement that he thought the shooter was John Flynn, who was a Winter Hill associate, who would later be charged with that crime tried for that crime, but acquitted of that crime. It wasn't until 1999, when Kevin Weeks turned rat piece of shit informant, that the FBI was able to nail Bulger and Weeks for the actual murder itself. It was Kevin Weeks who confirmed that it was Stevie Flemmi who was the other shooter. So right away we see that John Connolly provided information that got two people fucking killed. And so I don't feel bad for John Connolly in any sense. He was giving them information which led to a murder. Lynn Del Vecchio, same sort of deal. The FBI does some crazy shit, let me tell you. Through the 1980s, Bulger and Flemmi and Kevin Weeks ran shakedowns all through East Massachusetts: extortion, loan sharking, gun running, marijuana, bookmaking, truck hijacking, and more. They had ties with the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, and would even send machine guns to Ireland. The state police and the feds were trying as hard as they could to get Whitey Bulger arrested by using surveillance and wiretaps, but every time they just couldn't get enough evidence. For starters, Kevin Weeks, Stevie Flemmi, and Whitey Bulger were smart enough never to talk over the phone. They would meet in a private place where they couldn't be seen. With John Connolly, corrupt cops, and the state police, they were pretty much able to commit crimes and not get indicted. That should have been a very, very big red flag to the state police and everybody else, but apparently it wasn't. While Connolly really helped insulate the three, the fact is that Richard J. Schneiderhan, who was high up in the state police, protected them more proficiently than Connolly ever could. He would make sure that evidence disappeared. He would make sure that case investigations would go another direction. During the mid-1980s, Bulger gathered up all the drug dealers in Boston and has them come to his headquarters. One by one, he pretty much lays it out. And his plan was to extort every single drug dealer in South Boston and in Boston in general. His plan was simple. He would gather each one, tell them he was offered a ton of money to kill them, and then would tell them that if they paid him a huge amount of money, he would let them live. They all paid. The problem was that Bulger didn't want to take a trafficking pinch, but the lure of drugs and the money involved was too big to resist. So he ends up getting involved. The deal was they didn't want to personally handle the drugs. Instead, they took a tax and would deal with big distributors in the state who were already bringing in drugs. And it really was, it was just basically handing it off for a huge kickback. The only way street corner dealers could get drugs was from Bulger and through the distributors, and he had 4 levels of insulation so that it was very hard for anybody to find out that he was secretly involved in it. The drug trade in Southie was managed by John Shea, who Bulger once thought of killing, but decided that shaking him down was a better business plan. Bulger had strict rules for drug dealers who paid him protection money. According to Kevin Weeks, the only dealers they pushed out were heroin dealers. Jimmy didn't allow heroin in Southie, but that unfortunately is completely untrue. I don't believe that for a minute. In fact, heroin wasn't in Southie until Jimmy Bulger comes along, so that should tell you something. According to Kevin Weeks, Bulger forbade PCP or any drugs being sold to kids. Dealers who refused to abide by Bulger's rules were killed or violently driven out of Boston. In 1990, John Shea and his associates would be arrested for narcotics by the DEA, the police, the Boston Police Department, and the state police. Shea and his men refused to testify against Bulger, Weeks, and Flemmi. And while losing Shea off the streets set them back financially, Bulger always had his hand in multiple businesses, and if one got busted out, 3 more were behind it. And with Shea off the streets, Bulger lost control over the market of drugs, and it also wouldn't be until 1999 that Bulger was linked to narcotics. I've been a long, firm believer in that Whitey Bulger and Stevie Flemmi are the exact ones who ratted out John Shea. John Shea being a stand-up guy didn't utter a word about Bulger, but I firmly believe Connolly knew. I firmly believe the FBI knew, and they got Shea off the streets, and that just allowed Bulger to make even more money. In the summer of 91, Bulger and 3 friends came into possession of the winning Massachusetts lottery ticket, which had been bought at a store that Bulger secretly owned. The 4 men shared a prize worth $14 million. Bulger was widely thought to have obtained a percentage of the winnings illegitimately, which we know he did. In fact, Bulger just pretty much shook the fucking winner down. Either pay us or die. That was pretty much how it went. In 1994, a joint task force of the DEA, the Massachusetts State Police, and the Boston Police Department launched a probe into Bulger's gambling operations. The FBI, by this time, knew they had been compromised, and what they did was they they didn't inform other agencies what they were doing because they knew they had a rat, they knew they had a problem, so they just kind of handled it on their own, because if they didn't, then the information gets out, and then all of a sudden they don't have a fucking case. After a number of bookmakers agreed to testify against Bulger and company, a federal case was built against him under the RICO Predicate Act. Between 93 and 94, Bulger and Flemmi had begun dumping money into offshore accounts, utilizing bank accounts in different countries. They would travel abroad constantly, and what it was all designed to lay a foundation to take off, to get into the wind if the feds came down. Bulger had fake IDs, aliases, different addresses. Whitey was completely prepared to get into the wind if he needed to. He had safe deposit boxes, cash, jewels, passports. Jimmy just didn't leave anything to chance. He hid money and IDs in Europe, Oklahoma, Montreal, Dublin, London, and even in Birmingham, and even in Venice, Italy. So if the heat came down, Jimmy had enough to take the fuck off. In December of 94, Connolly finds out that indictments had come down from the Department of Justice and the FBI was closing to making arrests during the Christmas season. He meets secretly with Whitey Bulger and tells him. Bulger immediately says, "Fuck this noise," and he ends up taking off out of Boston in December 23rd of 94 with his wife, common-law wife, Teresa Stanley. Bulger and Stanley end up going to Selden, New York for 4 days before heading to New Orleans to spend the New Year's Eve and day on January 5th of 95. Bulger was prepared to head back to Boston as he felt maybe Connolly's information was a little preemptive, maybe a little bit off. However, later that night, Stevie Flemmi gets arrested in Boston by the DEA and the Boston Police Department. And one of the detectives, who is Michael Flemmi, which was Stevie's brother, tips off Kevin Weeks to tell him, and Weeks essentially gets on the line with Whitey and tells him, "Hey, Stevie just got arrested, so don't come near here," which immediately changes Whitey's plans. Bulger then ends up taking off and spending the next 3 weeks in New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco before Stanley decided she just didn't want to be on the run anymore and wanted to go see her kids. And what Bulger does is they hop a flight to Clearwater, Florida. Bulger grabs money, his Tommy Baxter fake ID, his safe deposit boxes, and he drives Stanley back to Boston, all the while knowing the FBI is looking for him. And he ends up meeting with Kevin Weeks at Malibu Beach in Dorchester and ends up taking Catherine Gregg, who was sort of his gumata girlfriend on the side, and him and Catherine disappear into the wind. Weeks later, Kevin Weeks would meet with Whitey Bulger in Chicago, where Bulger admitted that he was sort of staying in Louisiana with a friend and congratulated Weeks on taking over the Winter Hill gang and told Weeks that if he was arrested, just to blame the entire thing on him, which should have been a sign to Kevin Weeks that something wasn't right. In mid-November of 95, Weeks would meet Bulger for the last time as a free man. They met in front of the New York Public Library and they went out for dinner. According to Weeks, Bulger was nervous, quiet, and wasn't the same guy. Weeks at the time just thought it was Bulger coming to terms with the idea of never being able to come back to Boston, but little did Weeks know at the time it was because Bulger had pretty much dogged him out with Flemmi for decades. Well, not decades, but for years. November of 17th, 99, Kevin Weeks gets arrested by the DEA and the state police. By the time the cops came, Weeks already pretty much knew that Whitey Bulger was a rat. Weeks at the time still believed in the code of Boston, the streets, and he wasn't going to talk. The problem was, for Kevin Weeks, at least according to him, and these are his words, that while he was waiting trial in Rhode Island while he was waiting trial in Rhode Island Wyatt Federal Prison, Weeks was approached by another inmate who was a made man in the patriarchal crime family, who tells Kevin Weeks, "Kid, what are you doing? Are you going to take it up the ass for these guys? Remember, you can never rat on a rat. Those guys have been giving you up for 30 years. A short time later, Kevin Weeks would become an informant and tells the feds fucking everything. Gives them the money, the bodies, the names, the scenarios, and everything. Now, my opinion of Kevin Weeks is that he's an absolute atrocious piece of shit, punk, rat motherfucker. Now, there is a saying, and I hear it all the time, of you can never rat on a rat. Bullshit. If a guy rats on you, you don't say anything. You joined a fucking criminal organization. Take your fucking pinch like a goddamn man. Kevin Weeks didn't want to do prison time. It had nothing to do with some patriarchal guy coming to... First of all, a patriarchal guy isn't going to give him the fucking time of day anyway at that point. Especially with Whitey, the rumors being surrounded that Whitey was a rat. Okay? And you're telling me a made guy went to Kevin Weeks and is like, what are you going to take it up the ass for? You can't rat on a rat. No Italian-made guy is ever going to fucking go to somebody and say, you should rat too. It just doesn't happen. I don't believe the story. I think it's bullshit. I think Kevin Weeks has used this as an excuse like all fucking rats do. Now, the argument people make with me all the time, well, what was Kevin Weeks supposed to do? He was supposed to take his medicine like a fucking man and go to prison. But he didn't want to do that, so he rats on everybody. John Motorano and God knows how many other fucking people. I don't have respect for a guy like that. I just can't. I don't give a fuck if Whitey Bulger told him his mother was dying of syphilis. And she needed Tic Tacs and a fucking glow-in-the-dark fucking light stick to live. You just don't fucking tell on people. So Kevin Weeks is no better than Whitey Bulger. You can't use the line, you can never rat on a rat. Bullshit. A rat is a rat is a rat. You tell on somebody, you're a rat. Bottom line. Bottom fucking line. He went on to testify against people. So this idea that he planned on living by the code, but it wasn't until an Italian-made guy came to him and says, what are you doing? That he changes his mind? Bullshit. He didn't want to do fucking 50 years in prison. That's the bottom line. He can spin his narrative however the fucking way he wants, but the bottom line is Kevin Weeks is a fucking rat. That's just the truth. You can have a difference of opinion with me. That's fine, but I stand by what I said. He ratted. He is a rat. You cannot putting a silk head on a pig. You're still a fucking pig. You can change the scenario, the narrative, all you want. You testify against somebody else for a reduction in sentence, you're a fucking rat. Bottom line. All right. The last sighting of Whitey Bulger was in London of 2002. The FBI would chase crazy leads trying to find Whitey Bulger, but they just couldn't. It seemed like the FBI was always a day late and $1 short on actually finding Whitey Bulger. They even staked out the Santa Monica Pier for months hoping to find him. They were actually on the right track at that point. On June 22nd of 2011, Bulger was arrested. He had ended up spending 16 years on the run, 12 of those on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list. Bulger was nabbed by the feds and other multiple agencies working in connection together. The FBI has claimed that this is a result of a massive media campaign, but really the result is because somebody recognized Bulger and dropped a fucking dime. The FBI always wants to take credit for some other shit, but somebody recognized him. Former model Anna, I'm going to fuck this name up, Bjorn Daughter, who was an Icelandic actress, former model, had actually lived in the same neighborhood, in the same condo complex as Whitey Bulger in Santa Monica. She recognized him, and she ends up dropping a dime on him. The next day, the feds were able to lure Catherine Grieg out of the house on some bullshit, and they arrested her. Then they moved in to arrest Bulger. Inside, they find more than $800,000 in cash, 30 weapons, multiple fake IDs. Bulger's mistake is very easy. He stayed in one place for too long. He was moving around prior to that every couple of months, moving here, moving there. The mistake he made was sitting down tight on a place for more than 6 months. That's what got him fucking pinched. As Bulger was brought back to Boston, he began to work fully with authorities, meaning he was ratting out more fucking people. He explained his days as a fugitive, basically how he did it, saying that he would go back and forth to Mexico to get his needed heart medication, which is one of the things that the FBI was really watching close. He had a medical condition, and therefore they were trying to figure out how he was getting this. Was it through a middleman? But he was actually going to Mexico to get it. Bulger would be arraigned in court on July 6, 2011 on 48 charges, including 19 counts of murder, extortion, money laundering, obstruction of justice, perjury, narcotics distribution, and weapons violations. All charges which he pled not guilty to. Grieg, Bulger's girlfriend, would plead guilty to conspiracy to harbor a fugitive, identity fraud, and conspiracy to commit identity fraud, and would get hammered by the judge who sentenced her to 8 years in federal prison. By many accounts, the death of Jimmy's son Douglas at age 6 destroyed him. He was always fucking nuts to begin with, but his son died of a severe allergic reaction to an aspirin injection, and Jimmy said right after his son died that he would never hurt like that ever again, and his son basically died in his arms. By all accounts, anybody that knew Jimmy Bulger said he was always fucking nuts, but after that incident, he was never the same guy. Just didn't have any feelings, any emotions, nothing. And so there might be something said for that. Bulger specifically really hated the press in Boston, especially when they got shit wrong. Back in the 80s, when beat writer Paul Corsetti was reporting on the Louis Lateef murder, he pretty much named Bulger as the murderer for several days in a couple of different articles, and Bulger ends up approaching Corsetti and tells him, "I'm Jimmy Bulger, and if you continue to write shit about me, I'm going to blow your fucking head off." Corsetti, like a bitch, runs to the Patriarchus for help, who pretty much laugh at him because they're not going to get involved in some little weasel shitbag reporter crying the blues because he opened his mouth. They just weren't going to get involved in it. And the next day, what does Corsetti do? He runs to the cops. Howie Carr's hatred for Whitey Bulger is fucking legendary. In fact, when Bulger was killed just a couple of months ago, Carr celebrated by putting money into the Assassin's commissary account for doing a great job and a great public service. Bulger once wanted Howie Carr dead. Kevin Weeks also wanted Howie Carr dead, who at times has written a narrative filled with majority of it being facts, but there are some things that he has written about that aren't exactly accurate and are lies. And when I mean lies, meaning distorting the facts. He trashed the Bulger brothers and wrote a book about the family that was less than flattering. And while Bulger and Weeks both wanted Carr 6 feet under, excuse me, because they both wanted Carr 6 feet under, they really couldn't do anything about it, because if they had killed Howie Carr, it would have unleashed the gates of hell. They would have never gotten away with it. So I don't blame Howie Carr one fucking bit for hating the Bulger family and stating how he feels whatsoever. In fact, I thought his tweet about putting money in a commissary is pretty fucking hilarious. He has a right to feel that way. On June 12th of 2013, Bulger goes on trial in South Boston. He was charged with 32 counts of racketeering, money laundering, and extortion, firearms possession. The racketeering charges included that Bulger was complicit in 19 murder charges. The trial would last 2 months and included testimony of 72 witnesses. It would go to the jury August 6th. On August 12th, Bulger is found guilty on 31 of 32 counts. The jury would find that Bulger participated in the role of 11 murders. Those included Paul McGonigal, Edward Connors, Tommy King, Richard Castucci, Roger Wheeler, Brian Halloran, Michael Donahue, John Callahan, Arthur Barrett, John McIntyre, Deborah Hussey, who he fucking strangled. And the jury found that the prosecution had not proven that Bulger was involved in the deaths of Michael Milano, Al Plummer, William O'Brien, James O'Toole, Al Nobrangeli, Jimmy Souza, and Francis Leonard. They could not reach a decision on the murder of Deborah Davis. Bulger would be sentenced November 14th, 2013, and was sentenced to 2 life terms plus 5 years. The state of Florida would want to try him, as well as Oklahoma, for 2 other murders, which both would have been death penalty cases, but Bulger would never end up seeing those trials. In 2018, a day after being transferred to Hazelton, West Virginia from Florida, Jimmy Bulger, 89, wheelchair-bound, would meet a grisly end as 3 inmates slocked Bulger to death to the point of being unrecognizable. His eyes were gouged out and his tongue was almost torn out. One of the suspects was Patriarcha associate Freddie Gaius, along with Peter J. Calogero. These two just didn't hesitate. Bulger, listen, was slocked. He was laying in the bed and they slocked him to fucking death, pulled him on the floor, put him back in the bed. They were seen on video going into his cell shortly before 7:30 in the morning, coming out just a few minutes later. And they wouldn't find Bulger's body for like 3.5 hours, which I find highly suspect. So as far as I'm concerned, Whitey Bulger got what he deserved. He talked about people, and then he runs into people that are in organized crime, and they're going to set a precedent. Prison has a way of ironing shit out. Let's just say it that way. Some people I have seen on social media have said, "Oh, how could you hurt an 89-year-old guy and real tough guy?" Listen, and I'll say this again. For the people that say, "Oh, real tough guy beating up on an 89-year-old." Do you know how difficult it is to swing a slock 75 times in like less than 2 minutes? That you got to have some serious cardio going on. So, I mean, I know that's tongue-in-cheek and a little fucked up, but Whitey Bulger got what he deserved in the end. He killed women. First of all, how many Italian mobsters you know kill women? And don't bring up Tommy Patera and other people. But in reality, It just doesn't do it. In prison, there is a culture within the culture, and they don't respect rapists, kid touchers, and people who kill women. Just on that precedent alone, he should have been killed. And we, like I said earlier, we can argue the extent of why he was put on a tier with these guys. And the FBI is going to have to obviously explain that because, like I told you earlier, the Bulgers have filed a massive lawsuit against the Fed, the Bureau of Prisons, and the warden because they want to know why Whitey was placed among inmates who the system knew would probably act on something. It's not rocket science to see why Bulger got hit, but it's questionable as to why the system allowed him to get hit, if that makes any kind of sense. We understand why he was killed, but we don't understand why the Bureau of Prisons would just even put them together. That's like putting 9 rattlesnakes in a room and a fucking 4-year-old and not expecting the 4-year-old to get fucking bit. So we're never going to know why they put him with New England mobsters. I mean, that's a whole nother thing. If they put him with, like, gangsters from fucking New York, that might have had a different, like, outcome. But you put him with New England guys. Like, what do you think's going to happen? And so that's sort of the reality of what happened to Whitey Bulger. It's, to me, not unfortunate that it happened. I think it's the reality and the consequences of living a life of debauchery and being a rat. And there are going to be those who are going to attack me and say, oh, you were defending him. I'm not defending anybody. What he did was wrong. I think strangling a woman's pretty fucking pathetic. But as you see, if Whitey truly played the devil, you know, the devil always gets his due, and the devil always gets it in the end. And in this case, Whitey Bulger got it. And he got it 75 times real quick with a fucking master lock and a sock. And so what ends up happening to the 3 guys involved? Well, 2 of them are doing life sentences anyway. They got nothing to lose. The other one was doing like a 20-year bit. Might as well kiss that goodbye. They're going to do a lot of solitary time. But in prison, there is a code in and of itself. And why on earth the FBI put Whitey Bulger on that tier, I will never understand. I will never. Maybe it's because he embarrassed the FBI and they says, you know what, whatever. But you can't tell me that the fucking hacks sitting on the tier didn't kind of see what was going on. I don't buy that for a minute. And you also have to say this, and I think this is what lends itself to any sort of conspiracy that's going to begin, is that they knew Whitey Bulger was coming there. The hacks put it out on the fucking tiers that he was coming. It's not just like all of a sudden he gets there at 4 a.m. and like 12 hours later he's fucking dead. Doesn't happen that quick. So the hacks put it out. You know they did. And he got what was coming to him. 10 times over. And the thing is he had an easy death than some of the people he killed. That's reality. That's the reality of it. All right, so all that being said, that is the Whitey Bulger Show. If you want to not debate me, but if you have your theory on the conspiracies, send them to me. I'm interested in what other people think. I'm not always right about things, but I think reality is what it is. I don't think the FBI is complicit. The only thing they can really be complicit is how the fuck can you put him there? Why was he even put there to begin with? He's supposed to go to a medical wing, but what I've been told was he got the medical issue taken care of. He's 89 goddamn years old. You couldn't put him down in Butner, North Carolina, and just let him fucking wheel himself in a circle all day. He got what was coming to him, and that is proof enough that the streets always work in a circle. Always. They always will, and that's the bottom line. All right, so for next week, we are going to do a big Q&A with a new subject and etc. So send your usual complaints, your threats, your compliments all to the same place. Follow us on Twitter at RealMobTalk7. Check out the True Crime Podcast with my partner Scott Williams Collier. Check out Mob Talk Radio on Facebook. Give a like, give a subscribe. All I ever do is ask you to do one thing, and that one thing is share, even if you fucking hate my ass. Just go ahead and share. All that being said, look for the Q&A post to be put up probably Monday or Tuesday. We're going to try to answer as many as we can. If you have any suggestions of a show you'd like to hear, please let me know. You can send me a direct message on Facebook or a direct message over on Twitter. All that being said, we will see everybody next week.